The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster, who is also the chair of the Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just like to touch briefly again on regulatory capital levels. You know, I'm amazed at how consistent that your industry is. When you come to us, it is almost always with some elaborate set of logic to try to convince us that you should be allowed to lever up more. And it's interesting because if you, if you probably all been forced to learn all about the Mogliani-Miller theorem that says the return on equity is independent of capital structure and in particular independent of leverage. And so why is it that you are always demanding higher levels of leverage? And I think part of the answer was well analyzed at the end of the financial crisis, that you all benefit from having the federal government and the federal taxpayer as the insurer of last resort. You know, if under an extreme disaster, if one of the cities you do business with gets nuked, you're all insolvent, and you will be bailed out by the government, and that's okay. But the question is how far out on the tail the government should assume that risk. And so the game that you will always be in is trying to allow you to lever up and expose the taxpayer to that risk. And our job will always be to push back against that and demand enough levels of regulatory capital that it's very unlikely that the taxpayer will be called upon to do that. And so, just a quick question there. Do any of you believe that the higher regulatory capital levels of Dodd-Frank have prevented you from having an extraordinarily profitable decade? The records show that no one has indicated such. So I think that's a very significant conclusion from the whole debate here. And I'd like to spend some time talking about secure digital ID and know your customer requirements. Mr. Demchak spoke eloquently about the difficulties of dealing with financial fraud, and a lot of that is identity fraud. Mr. Moynihan had a very unpleasant experience with the failure of the federal government or state governments to have any kind of secure, reliable way of authenticating you are who you say you are online, and exposing you to very high levels of fraud and having to do something quick and dirty and unfortunate in trying to fix that. This experience wasn't shared in countries where they had a secure and reliable way of proving you are who you say you are online. And the EU, most all of you do business internationally, and you're probably aware the EU has a very comprehensive roadmap for a secure digital ID that would allow you to, if you want to open a bank account, you walk into a branch, you get out your cell phone, you say, okay, get your passport or whatever it is, or your real ID compliant driver's license if it's in the US that's on your cell phone. Convince your cell phone that it's really you and someone hasn't stolen your cell phone, and with a pretty quick interaction, have a very secure way of proving that you are a single legally traceable person. And there is a roadmap that's actually being rolled out by a number of states. Ironically, the technical standards behind those were all developed by NIST in the United States, now adopted by ISO and now being used in Europe. There are countries that you do business in, like Korea, where this is a reality today, that you can prove use modern technology, use your cell phone effectively like a security dongle. So what is your stance on this? What are the differences you see in the different countries that you operate, some of which have secure digital ID, some of which are moving toward it? And what is your feeling of where the United States should be going on this? Mr. Demchak, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the question and for the thought that you've clearly put into this. It is a big problem in our country, and I think we should move towards a digital ID. It's something that the banking industry is actually working towards today with a product called Authentify, where once you authenticate yourself with one bank, we can share that ID in any other service that you might want to use electronically. We have to get this sorted. Fraud is a massive problem, and our methods, our historical ways to deal with this aren't working.
Yeah, and that's a very noble approach to deal with a serious problem, but I think that there is ultimately a real government function in issuing that, that authentication. And we have that in the real ID. We have that for physical ID, and there are standards that are being deployed in individual states. So I'd just like to end with a shout out to the Better Digital Identity Improving Digital Identity Act that we now have moving in both the House and the Senate. It was marked up in OGR. Senators Loomis and Kirsten Gillibrand are behind it. And if we can get this across the finish line, at least on the government level, we will hopefully have something to avoid the nightmare that Mr. Moynihan's bank went through, and at least have the government given a way to have citizens authenticate themselves. Thank you.